For this particular morning session, I am using his theory in order to focus on the possibility of the application of just one of these many concepts. So it's that idea of common sense. So this is my the whole thing that I'm attempting to achieve in the paper, and I'm focusing specifically on um, how we can use common sense. And I'm thinking of common sense in a kind of Janus-phased manifestation, which is how Hall talks about it, as a kind of cognitive affective web that both positions the subject but also holds the potential for transforming and being transformed by the subject. So in the process, I hope that I will be making some kind of contribution to the growing academic discourse that is happening right now about processes of racialization and their articulations with processes of sexualization in what seems to be an unchanging classed global structure. And I just want to make one correction because you're seeing this there. The Tatum Law is a 2015 book, not 2014. I had already done the slide when I realized that the book was published more recently than I had thought it was. It's 2015. So I'm beginning the exploration by focusing on literature that was produced within the nationalist ethos of the pre-independence period in Trinidad and Tobago. And I just want to make a little, to put in a little clause here, that I'm focusing specifically on Trinidad and Tobago because it allows me to be specific in my analysis. But I could just as easily have taken literary texts produced in the same period from just about anywhere in the Caribbean and have come to pretty similar conclusions as I do in this particular paper. In this time, the nation struggled to come into existence under the weight of colonial opinion that the inhabitants were not a people. And I'm stressing that, a people. This had been adamantly asserted by Governor General Ralph Woodford in the 1860s, and it was reasserted, although we can say in something of a lamenting tone, by the first Prime Minister, Eric Williams, in 1962, a full century later. It is noteworthy, therefore, that there are many, so we're looking at that time span, and that there are many who are still of this opinion. Back in the day, in academic circles, this common sense view of the people was bolstered by the predominant model of Caribbean society that was then in operation, and that is, as we all probably know already, that's the plural society model, which in Furnival's words are, quote, unquote, distinct racial sections within an elaborate Western superstructure over native life. So that's the concept of society that we see happening from Woodford's time. So it's this whole historical trajectory. Woodford is saying it, and it's a common sense assertion at the time, because that's the only way you can say things, if they can manage to resonate with the common sense understanding of everyone. So he's making this assertion about the people. In 1962, the first Prime Minister repeats it, and in academic circles, that's the talk in terms of the analysis of society, that there is no people to speak of, that the process must involve the social goal in these circumstances, and it included everybody, as I'm pointing out, politicians, academics, everybody. The social goal seemed to be very clear, to create a one out of the many, and that was through a variety of liberal assimilationist techniques. So the more suitable social model for the purpose was a new Creole society one. So for many, especially those politically inclined, the way towards this perfect post-independence Creole model was via an awakened consciousness of class and the elimination of class inequities and inequalities. So the socialist realist literature produced by the writers at the time were participating in this enterprise. And in this particular paper, I'm looking at the work of the all-male Beacon group in Trinidad and Tobago, which included names like Alfred Mendez, C.L.R. James, and the particular text that I have chosen to look at, which is the one by the youngest member at the time of the Beacon Group, Ralph Devoisier. He was born in 1907. He lived to be 100, he died in 101, he died in 2008. So obviously this kind of work can keep you young and going. So Ralph Devoisier and all of these members of the Beacon Group were writing the kind of work that they produced in order to help to achieve this particular end. That is the goal of analyzing society in order to work towards helping to develop a new concept of the Creole society model. Now, later works would participate in the same kind of enterprise, and that work included works by Samuel Sullivan, by the Naipaul's. So they continued the project, but it was never again, and it has never happened again in Trinidad and Tobago Act, I think anywhere in the Caribbean, that kind of grouping and the group project of changing society through literature has never again been repeated. But the same kind of writing has nonetheless been produced. So Devoisier's novel, Rum and Coca-Cola, was first published in 1956. The setting of the story, however, is in the late 1930s and the early 1940s. And it has been selected specifically because it can be seen as a paradigmatic case of the common sense of the time that has been represented by, as it has been represented by all of those writers that I have spoken about before. So the same common sense of what the social problems were, what the solutions were, and their entire enterprise was a socialist project. And since I'm already getting a signal that it has 10 minutes has gone, I've already elapsed and I only have 10 minutes left. I just want to point out that in many respects, since I'm seeing Amilcar here, the project that, and others as well of course, that in many respects, this project resembles the project that is being spoken of now as relevant. We need to think about that a little bit. The period of publication as well as the setting are important to note, because the setting is the time of the labor riots in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course that was led by Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler, and if we know something about him, that would help to contextualize the writing. And it was a time of great poverty and a time of great social ferment. I am seeing that our present times have something of the making of that in the short term. And the publication itself, of course, is occurring just before independence, and it is intended to influence, participate in the independence movement and in what the nation would be. So, like all of those authors that I've mentioned, the writer chooses to write about a particular kind of thing. So the novel begins with the escapades of a female character. And Devoisier, even though he begins with this female character, he is particularly interested in the male protagonist's awakenings. So he places the character, who is named Fred, in a love triangle. And again, the love triangle is the thing for most of the literature produced at the time. And that love triangle exists only because of the class structures by which the particular character is positioned. And the love triangle works well in this regard because one of the parties in the situation will always be of a lower class, and one will be of a higher class. And the male protagonist would be kind of like stretched across the two because it is class that is positioning the subject in order for him to become something, to transcend the person that he is at the beginning of the novel. So it defines the plot, in other words. So in Devoisier's Rum and Coca-Cola, one of the females, who is named Marie, so she has a beautiful name, Marie Gomes is her name, but she's called Mopsy by everybody. And because I have limited time, I'll leave you to play with the connotations of the idea that she's Mopsy. And she is this one important side of the triangle. So the novelist's characterization of this figure confers on her all of the qualities of the battered plural society, as well as those of the exotic and hence sexually seductive and appealing plantation Creole one. So you notice I'm distinguishing between a plantation Creole model of society, which then became formalized when the analysis started into the idea of the plural society model. And then the nationalist period is playing with a new kind of plural society model for the purpose of creating a one out of many. And when Kai's thing was playing, you know, the person who appeared with the frangipani around her head, and she was saying that, what was carnival is paradise? Something, right? Right. So the idea of paradise, you know, that the idea that the script is telling us that we must be happy, that the purpose of our being is the purpose of, and however that being happy is defined, is what people are trying to achieve, right? So that the idea that you must be reveling all in the time, and if reveling constitutes doing something with the booty, well then that is what you need to do, because that is what the script is saying. So that's the kind of way in which the common sense works. So that in Du Boisier's novel, as in many of these other writers' works, you have that kind of representation of the character. And what we are seeing in that way is that the writers are showing how race and sex and sexuality are articulated together in the same character. So that Marie's background, the French Creole mixed background and inheritance of the plantation society, is a racialization of her that makes it possible for her to be read in a particular kind of way. That she is this sexual character. She is somebody from whom you take, but to whom you give nothing, including no respect. So that's how she is positioned. So I really have to speed it up. So she remains essentially the same throughout the novel. But as protagonist, however, Fred is conferred with the ability to learn, to grow, and to change. He is the consciously Creole star of the story as well as of the nation. Fred's development into this status, however, is a consequence of his association with the other party in the triangle, who is given the name Indra. And she's a woman who is of a higher class and thus is a partial outsider to the organic community to which Fred and Marie naturally belong. So through Indra, Fred gains access to the inside circles of the elite, among whom the nationalist agenda is being debated and fashioned. And the novel relies on the contemporaneous reader's common sense grasp of those characters in order to make sense of the situation, particularly Fred's situation and Fred's choices. But at the same time, I would argue that it allows the contemporary reader in our post-structuralist moment, in particular given our contemporary theoretical understandings of these things, guided by insights like Hall's theorizations of the subject's multiple positioning, it allows us to unpack the tragedies of Fred's conscription, and I'm borrowing here from David Scott's way of saying the idea of how we come to be who we are today, that Fred's conscription into the modern moment of the birth of the nation. And it is made evident to us through the resolutions, or rather lack thereof, for the love triangle. Because I'll just skip ahead and tell you that nothing happens for anybody there, because Fred ends up being alone because he can't decide. He's torn, as I say, it's like, you know, being stretched on a cross for them. What is interesting though, because this is when people were thinking more in terms of essence, and we are looking here at the socialist agenda, which is about the idea that we can identify an essential self. So it is necessary to remember that about Du Boisier's work. It is necessary to remember that about the whole socialist enterprise, that it is based on a binary of an essential true self versus the false consciousness which the writers are working to get rid of. Because that's the whole point about in this period, the quintessentially realist work and how it is being constructed. For Du Boisier, the elusive experiences of sexual love are the indisputable signifiers of the true. Just like Salvon, for example, he represents them in a highly evocative manner. The book is wonderful to read because of his poetry of how he's representing these issues. But I don't have time to go into that. I just put a little snippet here for you to get a sense of it. And their veracities, therefore, throughout all of the history of the literary history in the Caribbean, nobody has ever taught to question the veracity of his representation of these this particular thing, just as they have never questioned Selborne's representation. Because I think that even though we are in the post-structuralist theoretical framework, we cannot get away from what Hall has said about the subject, in that you do have to position yourself somewhere, and that it is that positioning comes quite close to being an essence. And like it or not, for the female, having, you know, if you enter into a relationship with somebody, I shouldn't say for the female, because in the book it is about all, it is not gender specific at all. This idea of a committed relationship, a relationship working towards something, gives life its fullest and truest meaning. And it is because of how the social context, the sociocultural context, positions every single character in a way that none of them can ever achieve the same, because it stretches them, pulls them apart, does not allow them to come to terms with any sense of themselves as this essential self. That is where the tragedy of the story lies. So that Debussy represents it really, really nicely like this, you know. So the idea of ecstasy and peace in the same thing, that is what the idea of love is all about. And therefore it leads naturally to the talk of marriage. But, and he also goes on to talk about how she responds after, and I think that this is beautiful, that, you know, that makes life, she does not realize that she has a very hard life, she's dog poor. But because of the fact that, you know, she's having a relationship with this fellow, and, you know, she's seeing a future where they would be supportive of each other and so on, she's walking through life with a song on her lips, and even her awful boss is impressed by who she has become. But therein lies the sting of the whole thing, because immediately, even with, oh, I'm out of time, but immediately within the whole thing, this is what Debussy does. He inserts it even as the discussion is taking place. That is what Fred is thinking. He feels a joyful responsibility for her, and I thought that this was nice coming after yesterday's session, because I got the sense very often that presenters continue to talk in the sense that intellectuals assume some kind of responsibility in this very same sense in which we're having here, in this gendered, sexualized context. And I think that perhaps that is why my abstract speaks to the idea that we need to take seriously Scott's theorization of the idea of tragedy. And the idea that because life continues to be a kind of children of Sisyphus, kind of rolling the stone up the hill and the stone keeps on coming down on you, that perhaps we need to change the questions and we need to rethink what we are attempting to achieve. So thank you very much.